Hello, everybody. Yes, I know I'm early. You may wonder why I'm early. Well, I was sitting here staring at the screen. I haven't streamed in a couple of days. Hang on, let me mute. I haven't streamed in a couple of days, and I thought, why not just go ahead and jump in? And I haven't streamed in a couple of days because I've been looking for a really good topic, and I found a few. And I just didn't feel like doing a super long stream. So, as we get started, I wanted to direct your attention to my description box. There's a channel linked there called Teacher Therapy. And I swear to God, the lady that runs that channel is a national treasure. Yesterday, I binged a lot of her videos. And I was really riveted and fascinated and horrified and appalled by everything that I heard on her channel and by the comments that were left under the content. It's amazing how teachers, not only in the United States, but there was a teacher from the UK that did an interview with her, and it's amazing how consistent the stories are. It doesn't matter what grade level, it doesn't matter whether it's a public or private school, urban or suburban, well funded or not so well funded. All the teachers tell the same stories. All of them do. Um, that kids cannot sit still, that kids cannot read instructions, they can't follow directions, that they can't focus, that they can't read, that they can't write complete sentences, they can't master the subject matter. Hi, Anna. And when all else fails, what they do is they get together in little gangs and they try to destroy the teacher's life. Hi, Rio. Oh, my mic volume is going in and out. I'll see if I can fix it. If it continues, I'll switch mics out. I have another one, so just let me know if the problem continues. I've had that problem with this mic before. Anyway, so if you guys want to learn about what is going on with education now, specifically with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, by all means, check in with Teacher Therapy. The channel is linked in the description. You won't be sorry. You will not be sorry. It is a wonderful channel. And the only thing that all of these teachers have in common and that all of these school systems have in common, it's that they are teaching Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So anyway, welcome everybody who's here. I appreciate you being here. So before we get into luxury beliefs, I just wanted to do a quickie roundup of stuff that I've been noticing on YouTube, you know, the stories that are popping and whether or not I'm going to cover them. And the answer is no, but I might as well mention them and get them out of the way. So, one of the big stories in the commentary community has involved a content creator called Jake Doolittle. Jake Doolittle is from BreadTube. That's the left wing side of the commentary community. Jake Doolittle runs a charity. I cannot remember the name of it because I don't care and I didn't bother writing it down. But anyway, Jake Doolittle decided to start a charity where he gives away a whopping $500 a month to one person per month. And I don't know how the person is chosen. I guess that people will submit an application and they will say, I am having the following problem. And then the application or the tale of woe is vetted. And then the winner gets $500. But only one person a month gets the $500. So that's 12 recipients a year, which is not a lot, if I may state the obvious, if you don't mind. And $500 is not a lot of money. You can say that you are suffering from a health condition and that you need extra money for whatever reason, and you will be considered. It looks like you don't have to offer any proof. Um, You don't have to offer any proof of anything. You just write a sad story and they will put you into consideration. Anyway, apparently he was getting very angry and very vexed because he was mad that his content creator friends were not donating to his charity. And so he uploaded a video where he was basically blackmailing the people in the community and saying, I wrote to a bunch of you and you guys didn't respond, or you left me on red or whatever. And basically, I'm going to, drop a dime on you. And it didn't go over very well. Mostly among the content creators who are not in BreadTube, but in the commentary community. So the Tom Darks and the Nick Diorios and people like that. Because this Jake Doolittle guy had already covered himself in crap a year ago when he uploaded a video about Ethan Klein, who I think that we all know Ethan Klein is a bit of a hypochondriac, and he was worried that he had lupus. And so Jake Doolittle did a video where he was like, no, you don't have lupus. Of course, Jake is not a doctor. He is not, in fact, Dr. Doolittle. I know. Please give me the ba-dum-bump. And so he made a video pooping on Ethan Klein because he said something that he never said. He never said he had it. He said he was worried that he did have it because even though he didn't have any of the symptoms of it, this is classic, hypochondriac behavior. Yeah, exactly. He said he was faking an illness, which Ethan Klein never did. He never said he had it. And he never said he had cancer either. So somebody made a crack. It may have been Ethan himself that imagine the number of people who have tried to cancel Ethan Klein and H3H3 over the years. And imagine that you make a video defecating on Ethan Klein and that you're the one who gets canceled. Imagine that happens. I mean, I'm exaggerating because this Jake Doolittle guy has like 300,000 subscribers and he gets pretty good views on his videos. So yeah, that didn't work. And so when he decided that he was going to upload a video saying that if he didn't get a response from these other content creators, or that he had written to these other content creators who were supposed to be his friends, and when they didn't donate, he said that he was going to reveal the names. Let's just say that it went over very badly. The kid is nuts. He's very young. Maybe he'll learn something. Now, I have a recommendation for you guys. Now, this is based on me only watching partially. I haven't seen the whole thing. All right. I've only seen the beginning, but so far what I've seen is absolutely amazing. There's a new mini docu-series on Netflix called The Kings of Tupelo. It was produced by the same company that did Tiger King, only so far in this movie, or this documentary, no tigers have been harmed, thank God. Although I read in the description, or I saw in the trailer, that apparently an elephant gets killed in a drive-by, and I cannot tell you how intrigued I am. Not because I want to watch an elephant die, but I cannot imagine the circumstances of an elephant being killed in a drive-by. So I'm interested to find out why. So Tupelo being the birthplace of Elvis, a big industry in Tupelo is Elvis impersonation. And this story involves a guy who was an Elvis impersonator who eventually crossed paths with a guy. I swear to you, this is true. I'm not making this up. Crossed paths and got on the wrong side of a guy who is a Wayne Newton impersonator in Tupelo. And let's just say that things get so crazy. We're talking ricin letters. You remember when Obama and Senator Wicker of Mississippi received letters with ricin? That's the guy that was accused of sending them. But did he really? Actually, you're going to have to watch and see who did send those letters. It's 3 parts. It seems magnificent so far because, if the Southerners know how to do something really, really well, there are a couple of things Southerners do really well. One of them is cook. And the other is tell stories. They are amazing storytellers. And the way that this story unwinds is incredible. And actually, because of all the insanity that I saw just in the first part of the documentary, now Tupelo, of all places, is on my list of places to visit. I enjoyed my stay in Mississippi when I was there a couple of months ago, but I didn't really get a chance to go explore the state. Um, I was only in the Gulf area, and really, the Gulf area is not anything to write home about. There's literally nothing to do in Gulfport except for drive up and down the highway and check out what stores are in the strip mall that you drive by. Go to the casino or go to the insanely overpriced aquarium, which I would not recommend. Or eat and drink very, very delicious alcoholic beverages, which I do recommend very highly. That's the best part of visiting Mississippi. Anyway, so it's called The Kings of Tupelo. It is insane. It is off the rails. It is off the chain. It makes no sense. It is crazy. It is a wonderful piece of Southern Gothic true Americana. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, by all means, check it out. You are going to really enjoy it because it's nutsy cuckoo. And I did not know until recently that my friends in the UK, my Facebook friends, hey, Joe, my Facebook friends are fascinated by Mississippi. I don't know why Mississippi. I don't know why they picked that out. Why Mississippi? Why not Louisiana? Why not Alabama? What is it about Mississippi that they find so intriguing? So when this docuseries hit Netflix, they all watched it. It seems like they all watched it at once and they all went completely berserk. So I don't know if they think that Mississippi is like true Americana. I don't know what it is. I mean, maybe they're all fans of Elvis. I have no idea, but they loved it and I took their recommendation. And what I've seen so far, I am just enthralled. It is an amazing story. So, anyway, we're going to get down to the idea of luxury beliefs. Now, I had never heard of this, but some of my favorite channels hosted this author named Rob Henderson, who is a fascinating person. And he explained how he came up with this concept of luxury beliefs, where it came from, and who cares? Like, why would anybody even give a damn? Why is this important? Why does it matter? Actually, it matters a great deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this little Rob Henderson interview, and he has been interviewed by everybody, basically. If you're interested, you can check out longer interviews with him on Trigonometry and Andrew Gold's Heretics channel. But that's not it. I mean, you look up Rob Henderson luxury beliefs and you'll see a whole range of interviews with this guy going back a couple of years. And again, it's not just that he's a really intriguing thinker, but it's also his life story is amazing. So very similar to J.D. Vance in a lot of ways, except unlike J.D. Vance, this guy didn't have a grandfather and grandmother to move in with. He didn't have family to move in with. So his childhood was harrowing, to say the least. And by the way, if you're wondering why I'm not on camera today, simple reason. It has been raining cats and dogs all day, and it was raining yesterday too. My hair and makeup are in a state, the likes of which are not fixable. I am not presentable. Believe me, I tried. Okay, I made an effort. I did. I got out my volumizing serum and I got out my Il Maquillage foundation and I did my best. But I'm afraid that the humidity and the weather are just too much. I mean, I could come out in a face of makeup and a hat, but I didn't want to. And my hair frustrated me, so I said, fuck it. Today, I turned my camera off. All right, so let's listen to Rob Henderson and learn about luxury beliefs. Let's go.
Luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper classes while inflicting costs on the less fortunate.
Thank you, Joe.
100 years ago, you could immediately tell who was rich and who was poor. We've generally become a more wealthy society. Now, luxury beliefs have, to a large extent, replaced luxury goods. These are expressions of cultural capital. So if the conventional view is it's good to have law enforcement, well, if you want to indicate that you're not a member of the unwashed masses, you say, actually, we should abolish police and reimagine how law enforcement works.
We need to reimagine how we are creating safety.
The believer is sheltered from the consequences of his or her belief.
Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked, and I'm delighted.
And I wanted to sort of underscore what he just said, which is that the person expressing these beliefs is sheltered from the consequences of what happens when these theories are put into practice. So defund the police is one such luxury belief. I would say also that these needle exchange programs are luxury beliefs, only in that while there is a benefit, you can say that needle sharing, or not needle sharing, but needle exchanges are good in terms of reducing the spread of HIV and maybe Hep C, although the jury is still out on that one. You can make that argument. And I guess that there have been studies that have shown that needle exchange programs also encourage people to go into rehab. I haven't seen that play out here at all. And I guess that there are numbers to back that up. But these days, you can publish a study that says pretty much anything, and people buy it and they run with it. And it goes all over social media, and there's no evidence for it. But anyway, the people who say, well, we need to do the needle exchange here, we need to put a Narcan station there, are generally people who do not live in neighborhoods where these needle exchanges would go up if they're freestanding. I'm not talking about if you put a needle exchange in a hospital or something like that, but they're insulated from the consequences of their do-gooder intentions. And they tend to overlook the danger of biohazards, dirty needles in the street, medical waste, that kind of thing. What those needle exchange programs and drug addicts congregating around them do to a business district or any district where these needle exchanges are. We've been mocked a lot for opposing the needle exchange program in Connersville, and then we saw Anna Kasparian get up on a different channel and talk about how shitty the needle exchanges are in LA and what they've done to Los Angeles. So let's just say that it's been noticed. And if you think that it's hilarious to have a business district littered with dirty needles, then I don't know what to tell you. That's a you problem. It's very short-sighted. It's very selfish. And if you're just saying that because you want to prove that you think Negs and I are wrong, why don't you come to Connersville and take a look around and see what that needle exchange program has done to the business district. I urge you to do it. I know you never will, but why don't you give it a try? All right, let's go.
Delighted to be joined in conversation with Rob Henderson. Rob Henderson is a best-selling author, a Substacker, and you might know him as he coined the term luxury beliefs, which we'll come on to in a moment. Rob, I wanted to talk to you first about your new memoir, Troubled, because you have a PhD from Cambridge. You're a graduate from Yale, but you're probably not, you don't have the kind of background that someone might imagine to have gone to such prestigious universities, to say the least.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks, Fraser. It's great to be here. Right. Well, the book, I elaborate on my background, my unusual trajectory into higher education. So as you mentioned, I have these degrees from Cambridge and Yale. But before this, my life was a lot different. So the early chapters of Troubled, I describe being born into poverty to my mother. I grew up never knowing my father. And so my mother and I, we were homeless for a time in Los Angeles. We lived in a car. Eventually, we settled in this slum apartment in LA. And my mother just became very severely addicted to drugs. And later I read these reports from social workers and police, forensic psychologists indicating that she would have, she'd have visitors in and out of the apartment at all hours of the day and night and trading favors for drugs. And there was just a lot of neglect, which I describe in the book. And then, some neighbors called the police. They saw what was happening. And the police came, a social worker came and took me into a foster home in LA, and I spent the next 5 years or so bouncing around 7 different homes all around Los Angeles. Eventually, I was adopted, and this was the late 90s by this point. And, I was adopted into this working class family, mother, father, their biological daughter, who became my adoptive sister. But at that point, I got this kind of front row seat into this, what's been happening to families in blue collar working class communities around the US. There was a lot of divorce and financial catastrophes, separations, not just in my adoptive family, but also the lives of my friends who I grew up with. And I tell some of their stories as well in this book. But long story short, I fled as soon as I could, enlisted in the US Air Force, went on to Yale on the GI Bill, and then got a scholarship to Cambridge for a PhD. And
I was going to say, I don't want to use the term affirmative action, but I do want to say that if you are working in the admissions office of a university, and it doesn't even have to be an elite university, it doesn't have to be an Ivy, it doesn't have to be Stanford or University of Chicago, it can be any university anywhere, and you know about this guy's background and everything that he had to overcome to be able to get to a point where he was qualified to go to such a university. If you don't put this guy's application at the top of the heap, then I don't know what to tell you. I believe in giving a leg up and an advantage to people who came from these types of backgrounds and who can prove that they are scholastically apt and that they are hardworking and that they have put their nose to the grindstone. And that they are able to achieve what they could achieve at a university. So anyway, I think that this guy's story is absolutely incredible. And like I said before, very, very similar to J.D. Vance's story, although J.D. Vance didn't have to bounce around from family to family. He had grandparents that he could go to, but his background was quite similar. And he too ended up at Yale. So let's continue.
And the book sort of describes this trajectory and the lessons I learned and how I developed this concept of luxury beliefs.
And one thing that really jumps out from your story is how every time you seem to get a foothold somewhere, every time you feel a little sense of security, then your life changes. Either you're moved to another family or there's some kind of unspeakable tragedy happens. I mean, what does that do to someone growing up when you don't have that kind of stability?
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of the discussion in the US and in the UK as well, around the question of what causes or what inhibits social mobility, the focus is on poverty or inequality, material factors. And one thing I try to stress in this book is that, yes, there was some material poverty. I did grow up poor, lower middle class, kind of, in that bottom rung in American society. But what really held me back and weighed me down a lot as a kid was the instability, not so much the lack of financial security, but more so the lack of emotional security. So like I mentioned, I didn't have a father growing up. I temporarily had one with my adoptive family. My adoptive father subsequently deserted me, stopped speaking with me. And there was just so much chaos and uncertainty in my life, especially when I was in the foster homes, that over time, I just, I lacked the ability to become psychologically developed enough to fulfill my own potential. Yeah. So even though I was always a bright kid, kind of a curious kid, whenever someone would extend an opportunity to me, early on, I would sometimes take it, but then something would occur that would set me back. And I just stopped believing in myself, and I needed to get out of that environment. And that's why I left for the military, and that restored some of that confidence. But I have this line early in the book in the preface where if adults let a child down often enough, the child will learn to let himself down. Yeah. And that is what happened to me.
Yeah. And by the time you get to Yale, you find this complete kind of culture shock. I think that's fair to say. How did you describe that?
Well, so I arrived at Yale. This was September of 2015. So I had just spent 8 years in the Air Force. So I left, like I said, as soon as I could. I enlisted when I was 17. I had to have my adoptive mom sign what essentially was a permission slip for me to go because I was still legally a child. Left for the military, did 2 4-year enlistments, 8 years in total, arrived at Yale in 2015. And I arrived right at this kind of inflection point. A lot of people will know the mid 2010s was this strange period in higher education of a lot of protest, demonstration, students. This is kind of the birth of what people now call cancel culture or wokeness,
Right.
this new wave of political correctness. So
2015 was crazy.
I saw students calling for professors to be fired, challenging academic freedom, freedom of expression. I would hear unusual viewpoints that I'd never heard before around, decarceration, how we should shut down prisons, or how, we need to abandon this concept of monogamous marriage. And how we should legalize all drugs, and it was just this very I guess you could call it idealistic, but to me it just seemed like impractical and almost sort of naive and foolish view of how society works. And so I would interact with these students, and they would describe these opinions to me. And eventually, I between those experiences, reading a lot about how social class operates and the sort of cyclical nature of status and how it's analogous to fashion, and how, these beliefs, once they become fashionable and widespread, then the people at the top subsequently abandon those beliefs and move on to something else. And I saw this occurring in real time at Yale of people, this is where the defund the police movement came from. That idea originated in elite universities before we saw it spread later throughout the rest of the media and then to society. I saw the beginnings of that, and this is where the luxury beliefs idea came from. Luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper classes while inflicting costs on the less fortunate.
And we have seen how well the application of these ideas, or the implementation, I should say, of these ideas have worked out in Portland, in Los Angeles, in New York, in Oakland, in so many other cities. San Francisco, did I mention that? And the resulting backlash. We had seen numerous interviews with older people in the Black community who said they didn't want the police defunded. If anything, they wanted more police in those neighborhoods to protect them, and that they didn't agree with the activists insofar as defunding the police or pulling the police out of their communities was concerned, that was something that they couldn't afford, in terms of quality of life, safety, whatever. And again, all you have to do is visit those cities to see the consequences of implementing those beliefs. And you can see what happened to the politicians who were the biggest cheerleaders and backers of these ideas. And they're all out of office now. Well, maybe not all, but most of them, at least on the West Coast. It didn't work out so well.
And so the people who wield the most influence in society, who attend prestigious universities, who take degrees from those places and then move on to elite occupations with a lot of power and influence, and in terms of culture and policy, when they have bad ideas that spread throughout society, they are the least likely to incur the costs, and the rest of us bear the brunt of it.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have a slight tangent, a little bit of an aside. In the beginning of the stream, I was recommending that you all watch the channel Teacher Therapy, which I've linked in the description box of my channel in this chat, or this live stream. And the one of the most interesting things about her videos is the comments under the videos from fellow teachers. And somebody commented that they were either in medical school or they taught in medical school. And, I've been harping on at length about how the kids who graduate from these elite universities end up in positions of influence in Washington. They go into academia, they go into journalism and all that. But apparently, even people in medical school, even people at that age who reach that, who go through the cull of being admitted to a medical school, are also having a lot of trouble with reading, with following instructions, with the assignments in medical school. And in one class, 10% of the class failed an exam. And when they were asked, well, why did you fail? What happened? It turned out that none of them had read the directions. None of them had read the reading material and decided that it was too difficult to read what was assigned in a class in medical school, and that they went off and they watched videos or they went to alternative sources of information, which may or may not have been vetted. And so when people say, oh, well, kids get out of high school or they get out of junior high or they get out of college and they still don't know how to read and they still don't know how to follow instructions and blah, blah, blah. But so what? They're going to become New York Times employees or they're going to go off and work on the Hill or whatever. What about your doctor? How would you feel if you knew that your doctor didn't know how to read, that your doctor didn't know how to follow instructions, or your doctor was relying on random sources of information in order to prepare for an exam? That is very worrying to me. That scares me. Let's continue.
And I wanted to talk about some of the sort of specific ideas. I mean, did the idea, for instance, of white privilege strike you as sensible when when you first encountered it?
I mean, no, not really. So when I was in the foster homes in LA, most of my foster siblings were Hispanic and Black. There were a couple of white kids. It was very diverse, the foster homes. And then when I was adopted, I moved to this impoverished part of Northern California, in Tehama County, one of the poorest counties in the state. And it was mostly white, working class, some Hispanics, but there were it was just a lot of poverty. And the poverty mattered much more so than race or ethnicity.
Yeah.
And so I knew a lot of poor white people. And then when I joined the military, I knew sort of, working class, lower middle class white people who I served with. And then I get to Yale and people believe that you have this unique, special amulet of privilege because you're white. And none of it made sense to me because the students, I cite some statistics in Troubled.
Yeah.
There are more students at Yale from the top 1% of the income scale than the entire bottom 60%. And even the students of color at elite universities, by and large, come from upper middle class families.
They sure do.
And so even ethnic minorities who attend these schools come from very privileged backgrounds. And so, but I found that it was the white students who were the most enthused about this idea of white privilege. And to me, there was this twisted kind of pride in it, or like the satisfaction of, I'm white and I'm privileged and it's so bad and how horrible. And yet there was this kind of, they were indirectly elevating themselves by talking about this, because you're not losing status by saying that you have this privilege. You're actually increasing your status even more by acknowledging it.
Yeah.
At least within the context of elite universities. And so all of it just felt very disingenuous to me.
And obviously one of the big themes of your book is family. Do you think that is maybe the most destructive of the sort of luxury beliefs? This idea that, maybe family is oppressive, monogamy is outdated, all of those kinds of ideas that are swirling around.
Yeah, well, this is borne out in empirical research. The number one predictor, for example, of graduating from university is being raised by two married parents. The data on that, I mean, that's like crystal clear. But even my personal experiences, I had 5 close friends growing up, and of the 6 of us, none of us were raised by two married parents. And then I look at our life trajectories. I'm the only one of the 6 who went on to graduate from university, but only much later in life. I had to serve 8 years in the military first to get my life on track. But, I had 2 friends who went to prison. I had a friend who was shot to death. I have friends working in kind of, the margins of society, trying to make a go of it in these kind of low wage jobs, and they're doing okay. But then when I get to Yale, and almost every single person I ever met, they were raised by two married parents, stable, secure families. And yet, if you look at who is the least likely to support the idea that children should be raised by two married parents, these are people who have university degrees, earn 6-figure incomes, who they themselves follow that conventional bourgeois life track. There's a professor at Yale Law who wrote this book about meritocracy. And one line that he uses is, our modern day elites are non-practicing libertines. And what he means by this is that a lot of these people who graduate from elite universities, they publicly espouse this idea of you do you, whatever kind of lifestyle you choose, it's totally fine. All family structures are equal. But then privately, when you look at the choices they make, they are the most likely to get married, the most likely to prioritize education and family and their own children, and trying to set their own kids up for success. And meanwhile, for everyone else, they take this very sort of hands-off approach, or even try to undermine family, which I find shocking.
Yeah, and to what extent do you see?
That's become very trendy, and that was actually, in terms of the founding charter, I think it was, of BLM. That was one of the goals was to completely destroy the concept of the nuclear family, which is not a new idea, not by a long shot. I mean, these ideas they've been circulating for generations, but they really solidified in the 1960s. So it's not like, anybody's reinventing the wheel here. You know what I mean? But I've seen this myself. I saw it at Brown. I saw it among the kids that I went to school with. And it was absolutely true that they came from very, very privileged backgrounds. Many of them had gone to, Exeter and Dalton and Hotchkiss and the boarding schools. And even though Brown made an effort, much more of an effort than the other Ivies did, to try to mix it up and bring in more kids from public schools, more kids from different walks of life, different backgrounds, you could still sense that there was that the admissions process was weighted in favor of these sort of Ivy League feeder schools, the prep schools, and it showed. It absolutely showed.
Any of this as deliberate? Is it just something that's in the ether? Is it a natural part of human psychology to want to seek status? I mean, because it's hard to tell, are people deliberately undermining the family? Because I doubt they have ill intentions. I don't know.
Well, okay. So by and large, I would say that your intuition is correct. Most people don't have malicious intent, that they're just kind of going with the flow, that, oh, this belief seems to be fashionable and wins me favor among my friends. And it seems, at least at first glance, to be compassionate. And I want to appear to be a compassionate person. So they just kind of go with the flow. But there are, I would say, 10%, maybe 20% of people who espouse these beliefs and promote them. And they do have more sinister intentions, where, in a lot of activist circles, abolishing or abandoning the idea of a stable conventional family, like, they actually don't like that, and they do want to sever those bonds.
Right. Absolutely.
They think that the family itself is some kind of oppressive structure, but then often when you look at their own lives, they were raised by intact families.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, all this to say that I think most people, they don't hold sinister intentions, but there is a small number of people who do. And so it's tricky. You can't sort of paint everyone with the same brush. Is it conscious? Is it unconscious? I think it's both. It just depends on kind of who you're speaking with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what you're talking about is deeper than hypocrisy, right? It's not just do as I say, not as I do type thing. There is something actively harmful to the most vulnerable, but not necessarily harmful to perhaps people who already have a leg up in life.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a core feature of a luxury belief, is that the believer is sheltered from the consequences of his or her belief. And occasionally, they do incur the costs when they actually do practice what they preach. But one of the points I make in the book is that, if you have resources and education and social capital, all of these advantages available to you, even if you do indulge in novel relationship arrangements, you live in a polycule and you do drugs and you attempt to live in a dangerous neighborhood or something, the fact that you have all of these resources available to you means that even if you do try to live by these potentially destructive values, you're protected from a lot of it. You're not going to incur the same costs as people who are less educated and less fortunate than yourself.
Absolutely true.
And one thing that struck me in the book is a lot of people you're encountering at Yale believe themselves to be oppressed. What do you think the attraction is to being able to present yourself as such?
Well, I think there is this idea of virtuous victimhood, and this is sort of putting my academic hat on, but there has been research on this indicating that people seem to believe that if someone has suffered in some way, if they are beleaguered, then therefore we assign some kind of license to them, some sort of special status or value, authority to them. So,
when I first enrolled at Brown in 1982, they had this practice. I don't know what they call it now. I'm sure they still have it, but they've probably changed the name. And they called it Third World Transition Week, which is incredibly patronizing when you consider who was involved in it. It was supposed to be an orientation for the minority students before the white students came to campus. So the Asian students would be invited, the Hispanic students, the Black students, people like that. And during the course of this week, they were shown essentially horror films about what they were about to encounter at Brown, that made it sound like Old Miss in the 1960s, or, Alabama with George Wallace standing at the university door refusing to allow segregation to take place. It was ludicrous. It was 1982, Providence, Rhode Island, an Ivy League school. I mean, give me a break, right? So by the time that everybody else came to the dorm, and in case you're wondering, no, I was not invited, because even though I am from a Hispanic background, my last name does not sound like a Hispanic last name. So I wasn't invited to participate. But my neighbor, who had a Portuguese last name, who didn't speak a word of the language, whose family had been in the United States for generations, she was invited to attend, and I don't think she did. But one of the girls who attended was the daughter of a UN diplomat from India. Another one, who was my neighbor across the hall, came from a family of doctors, and he was Korean. And the funny story is, when I was setting up my stereo in my dorm room, I went across the hall and I asked him if he had some scissors, because I had to cut a wire, and he handed me a scalpel. I mean, he came prepared because he was pre-med, right? And so we had a meeting during orientation week, all of us, so we could sit down and chat. And the guy across the hall was getting really agitated, and he's like, well, this is the thing. Hey, Shadow Hair, he goes, I know that when you look at me, you see somebody who's Korean. And I said, but you are Korean. You make that sound so negative. Why are you attaching a negative value to that? Yeah, I see somebody who's Korean. So what? I mean, why is that a problem? And over the course of the semester, he calmed down, because he realized that he hadn't enrolled in some, horrible den of racist iniquity, and that all of us got along really well and it didn't matter. But I mean, if this was going on, 42 years ago, you can imagine how much worse it's gotten now. And I think that they eventually changed the name, because third world, I mean, even the students who attended were like, I'm not from the third fucking world. I'm from Groton, Connecticut. What are you talking about? You know? Anyway, let's continue.
Well, if I tell you, oh, I've been so oppressed because of my identity or because of this, that, and the other, then, then therefore you have license to speak on issues, and to, we confer this kind of moral authority on you. But the thing is, like, what I saw at Yale, people would attempt to sort of mine their own history and their own identity in order to co-opt the suffering of anyone who shares commonalities in terms of identity. So, if someone grew up materially well off and fortunate and so on, but they happen to be Hispanic or Black or a woman or what have you, then suddenly they can say, oh, well, people who looked like me decades ago underwent extreme prejudice and misfortune, and therefore you have to listen to me today, even though I've lived a very privileged life. And to me, this was, kind of a misguided way of thinking about things. There's this like obsession with victimhood, and
correct.
It's just, I think it's very unhealthy.
And today, people have luxury beliefs, but would people have held, certain beliefs for the same purpose in the past, or would people have looked to more, I guess, consumer items or whatever to show their status? What have you found out in your research?
Well, so a lot of the luxury beliefs idea was born out of, my readings of Thorstein Veblen. He wrote this book. He was a sociologist and economist around the turn of the 20th century. He wrote The Theory of the Leisure Class in 1899. And in that book, he describes how the elites of his day would exhibit their status with material possessions. So, delicate and expensive clothing, pocket watches, monocles, attending lavish and expensive ballroom events. And today people still do that. But my claim is that material possessions are a noisier signal of one's status. So 100 years ago, just by looking at how someone was dressed, you could immediately tell who was rich and who was poor. Whereas today, because we've generally become a more wealthy society, and because, it's just harder to tell just at first glance how much money someone has the way that you could in the past. Now, people express their status through luxury beliefs,
And can I just point out that he just mentioned Thorstein Veblen, The Theory of the Leisure Class. It's amazing how fresh that book is, even though it was written in the late 19th century. and I do recommend it. Thorsten Veblen, The Theory of the Leisure Class. It's a great read, and it's so incredibly relevant, very, very much ahead of its time and still applicable today.
Have to a large extent replaced luxury goods. These are expressions of what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called cultural capital, where you spend your wealth to attend certain kinds of expensive schools and universities. You absorb the mannerisms and vocabulary and habits and opinions and fashionable views of the elite. That's how you sort of enculturate yourself into it. And it's also how you sort of stand apart from the masses. So if the conventional view is it's good to have law enforcement, well, if you want to indicate that you're not a member of the unwashed masses, you say, actually, we should abolish police and reimagine how law enforcement works and, hire violence interrupters and, all these other sort of strange newfangled ideas.
Right.
Policing, that's so backwards and antiquated. This is like a way to signal one's position in society. Yeah.
And obviously a view like that, defund the police, presents itself as being caring, speaking on behalf of, particularly, racial minorities who might have been harmed by the police, but it sort of doesn't see the other side of it, where actually crime probably is, for people growing up in poor areas, is probably a bigger problem than police brutality.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I cite survey data that throughout 2020 and 2021, when representative samples of Americans were asked, should we defund the police? It was the highest income Americans who were the most supportive of defunding the police. The lowest income Americans were the least supportive. And then when you just look at Democrats, so this is not a political issue. If you just look at Democrats, white Democrats were the most enthusiastic about defunding the police, and Black and Hispanic Democrats were the least supportive. And yet, a lot of prestige media and cultural elites, they will appoint sort of members of these communities who they themselves often went to elite universities and claim to speak on behalf of these oppressed groups.
That's right.
And so we spend a lot of time listening to these activists, but very few of us will actually go into those communities and try to listen and look at the survey data. What do people actually want? Crime increased, violent crime, the primary victims, the violent crime increase. The majority of the victims were poor, marginalized people.
This is post George Floyd after
exactly
the
after
defunding
2020
the police experiments.
Violent crime skyrocketed, homicides increased across the board, but most of the victims were poor, marginalized, ethnic minorities.
Yep, and now we saw, as somebody pointed out in chat, Drax. Here it is. As Drax pointed out in chat. Yeah, and we saw the election outcome. We saw traditionally Democratic, staunch blue areas turn red. We saw these politicians either lose their elections or get recalled. And we saw that these were grassroots initiatives to get rid of these politicians. They were community members who had had enough. We're tired of being put in danger. We're tired of being lectured to by these activists who would sort of drop into their communities, lecture them, wave their finger at them, and then leave and go home, and leave these community members to sit back and pick up the pieces and deal with the damage that was caused by these fancy, Ivy League think tank ideas. And it turned out to be a giant disaster. I don't think that the defund the police movement succeeded in any of the areas in which it was implemented. I think that it led to anarchy and chaos and danger. And people said no. And
we're just kind of moving right along as if that had never happened.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I was going to bring it up. There hasn't been a real reckoning with that period. I mean, conservatives talk about it a lot, but the people who why has no one looked back and thought, did my idea of this new way of policing actually work? Did it actually do any good? That doesn't seem to figure. Even though if the objective is to look compassionate, you would think that would be quite important.
Yeah. Somehow we've created this system where elites, political elites, cultural elites, we can make catastrophic blunders, and it seems like we hardly ever learn any lessons. I mean, I'm not just thinking about the left, but the right as well, with the pull out of Afghanistan. That was a Republican led idea, and I don't think we learned anything from that either. We're just, it's nice to be at the top. I wrote a little bit about this on my Substack about the Harvard president Claudine Gay.
Oh yes,
she resigned, and this was seen as kind of a reckoning for her. but she still gets to keep her position at Harvard as a professor, and she's making $900,000 a year. And I'm like, that's what failure looks like for elites is, oh, you stepped down from your presidency, but you're still making almost $1 million a year as a professor. Like, oh, how sad for you.
Yeah. Failing upwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. And are some of these things cyclical? I mean, obviously we do want to challenge these ideas politically through debate, but would there also come a point where, for instance, if these views became unfashionable, if, say, working class people started taking them up, I doubt they will, but is there a possibility that they think, oh, I can't be associated with that view anymore because it's not at the cutting edge of what seems to be radical?
Yeah, I think there is this kind of cyclical nature where a belief starts at the top and then it spreads down. And, in the same way that, if during Fashion Week they debut a new item, new possession, and then people imitate that and it becomes more available at your local department store, then that's not cool anymore to wear.
Yeah, that's basically exactly what happened to Michael Kors when he went from being a kind of luxury brand, or perceived as a luxury brand, to being sold at airports and in outlet stores, and the prestige of the brand declined, and so did the sales. So there's an example. But absolutely, these beliefs are in fact cyclical. And I remember, I think he was asked, or somebody else was asked, well, what about a right-wing luxury belief? And the example was brought up of trickle-down economics, which is a really, really good example, actually. It didn't work. It was counterintuitive. And what cracks me up, leaving trickle-down for a minute, what cracks me up is when you see people like Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian and Kyle Kulinski and those guys, and they're talking about populism and the working class and the Democrats abandoning the working class. It's like, what do you people think you know about the working class? All right, you probably read Das Kapital in college. You probably have no interactions with the working class. And as a matter of fact, every time I hear you people talk about a movement, a grassroots movement that is led by actual working class people, you can hear the contempt in their voices. Oh, well, they're just a bunch of racists. Oh, well, they're just, a bunch of yahoos and they're the rabble and they're a problem. But, Brexit being a great example of this. Well, why don't you people listen to what these individuals are saying? You don't want to, though. You want to tell the working class what to think, and you want to tell the working class what's best for them, but you don't want to actually listen to their concerns. And that's very, very typical. So whenever Cenk starts babbling about the working class, I just mute. I can't listen to it.
I think opinions work in a similar way. I think there are some opinions that truly are kind of beyond the pale, like the defund the police thing. I don't think that'll ever catch on with normal people. But there are other opinions. I think, something like marijuana legalization. I think that arguably is one. There are probably others as well, where over time, once a belief is widely adopted and kind of passé, then cultural elites will move on to something else.
Yeah. So normal people are our saviors, potentially.
Maybe.
Hope lies in the frols.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. I think in some ways, they are kind of a moderating force. So
definitely. Rob Henderson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Fraser.
Well, I think Rob Henderson is fascinating. I love his backstory. I like his ideas. I think he's super interesting. I'm planning on reading his book, which I did buy. It's in my Kindle. But at the moment, I am reading Wicked because I thought, okay, I want to know what's going to happen in part 2. Yes, I could cheat and go on YouTube, and I could watch a video about what happens in part 2. It's not a secret. My God, Wicked has been on Broadway for 20, 30 years now. So it's not like nobody knows what's going to happen. But I would rather, you know what? It's funny, girl. I spoke about that at the beginning of the stream. That is also a luxury belief, in my opinion. I agree. So I'm reading the book Wicked. I heard it's very, very different from the stage play, very different from the movie. I hear it's quite racy, it's quite edgy. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to, see what all that is about. And so far, I'm really, really enjoying the story. It's very, very interesting. Talk about a character that gets taken down by, you know, by bad propaganda and a smear campaign. It's a great way of relooking at the Wizard of Oz. It's really, really interesting. So I'll give you guys a full review of that book when I'm done reading it. But I'm one of these people who tends to read like 10 books at once. And so I don't know when I'll finish Wicked. I'll dip into it, then I'll go and I'll finish reading something else, and then I'll say, "Ooh, that looks good," and then I'll start reading that. So far so good though. Well, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. I am going to find an interesting topic for tomorrow as well. I just don't know what that will be. And again, I would very much appreciate it if you would go into the description of this live stream and you would take a look at Teacher Therapy, that channel. I promise you that what you will hear on that channel will make your hair stand on end. But it's a necessary conversation to have about the combination of social media, lenient parenting, really bad changes that were made in education, this culture of not failing people, the culture of administrators going in and changing students' grades, the fear of expelling kids or holding them back or that kind of thing, and the terrible damage that it's done to the educational system, particularly to teachers, and the kind of garbage the teachers have to put up with and tolerate, and the terrible sort of campaigns that have been run by students against teachers trying to get them fired. It's like the children's hour, only not as sophisticated and certainly not as subtle also. Anyway, hey Reading, how are you? All right, guys. Once again, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Rio.